Hello, welcome to Oklahoma Moments. Today we have with us a very special Wilsonite, true native Wilsonite, I should say, Miss Louise Appleby Farrell Allred. Did I get them all in?
You got them all in.
The Appleby, you know, a lot of people say Appleby, but it's Appleby.
Appleby.
And, well, Louise, my goodness, you have such an interesting life. Yes, and your ancestors, I know that you have been excited about digging in. Of course, you knew a lot of this stuff.
Oh, yeah.
But to share it, and it was very interesting for your daughter Cindy and my daughter-in-law to type it up, and it was so interesting in reading it and going over it, and it's a privilege to have you on Oklahoma Moments.
Thank you.
I have always admired, you know, I have been after you for about 5 years to have you on the show, and I've kept saying, you can remember so much history here in Wilson, and there is so much that I want to preserve. So I think what we're going to do, don't be surprised if I say, okay, Louise, we're going to end this segment and we will continue and we'll do two 30-minute programs, because I don't think we can get all of the information, historical information that you have in just one show. So because you have a nursing career, you have a real estate career, you have a skating career, you have all these things. So I want to get in, but tell me, of course, I've already told your name, but just go ahead and tell where you were born and your parents' names and about your parents.
Okay. Well, I was born January the 6th, 1927 in Borger, Texas, to Howard Duvall and Mattie Catherine Appleby. We were there because my dad had invented some oil field equipment and tools, and he followed the boom towns using them. And he had just left not too long before from Dillard, Oklahoma, where he had lived many years, and he worked for his tools for Carter Oil Company, and he also had a cafe and a furniture store. He was born in 1864 in West Virginia, and his father was an early-day gunsmith. And after the death of his wife, he loaded his children and his tools on a houseboat and started floating down the Ohio River with the current until he would come to a town where he'd lay a plank to shore, and then he would stay there repairing and producing muzzle-loading rifles. And when the work ran out, he would float on down to the next town, and it took him about a year to get down to Marietta, Ohio.
Marietta, Ohio.
Right. And there he discovered that there was already some gunsmiths located there, so he had a steamboat either tow him or push him up the Muskingum River to Lowell, Ohio, where he established a home and a gunsmith shop and a hardware store.
Okay, now would probably be a good time to show the guns.
Pictures of the guns.
Yes,
yeah.
Yes. Generally show those. Yes, and I'll tell you what. Let's focus in on the boat, the houseboat there. I think that's the houseboat, and that you wanted to share. And let's focus in on that.
Well, this gives an example of how they came down the Ohio River. That is the Ohio River, but now those houseboats and steamboats were
at a later date.
Ported. No, it was in 1880 that this picture was taken, and that was at the Wheeling port, and Ohio was over on the other side of that river, the Ohio River. But this was at Wheeling, West Virginia. But it gives you an example of how they floated down the Ohio River on a houseboat. There is a couple houseboats listed, in that picture.
Okay, now do we go to the cannon type
well,
gun first,
now,
or do we go to those down in the lower right?
Those in the lower right are in a museum. One of them belonged to my grandfather, Alexander Appleby, who was the gunsmith. But then the cannon and the other gun that is shown there, the cannon was made by my Uncle Wiley after the death of my grandfather, Alexander.
Really?
And he made that for the town to be fired on the 4th of July, and it really made a big noise. But there's one of my grandfather's guns lying there, beside it. And
well,
then,
I think that there was a tombstone also shown.
Well, now that tombstone was something that my grandfather and Uncle Wiley and relatives are buried in this Green Lawn Cemetery in Lowell, Ohio. But the National Rifle Association wanted a larger monument put there so that they would always be able to remember early day gunsmiths, and especially the Appleby family.
Oh, wow.
And so they
erected
that stone there where their graves are.
Well, I noticed at the bottom, of course we can't see it now.
Early
but at the
day
bottom,
gunsmith.
Yes,
Mhm.
yes. And
Yeah.
this says the Appleby family. Well, that is neat.
Right.
And it is so interesting. And then you have two pictures where you went back there.
Yeah, in 1988,
Oh, yes.
I went back to visit with the man that acquired my granddad and Uncle Wiley's gunsmithing tools was Cecil Brooks, and we visited with him. Such a nice person, and there.
Okay, let's show those pictures, Darren, of where she went back there. Let's zoom in on.
There's the sign of my
let's zoom
uncle
in
and
on-
my dad,
Yes, let's zoom in on that.
Appleby Brothers, Superior Gun Makers, and
Oh.
Hardin and Wiley was the proprietors.
Oh.
They followed in their dad's footsteps with the business after he died
There it
in
is.
1906.
Yes.
And by that time, breech-loading guns had largely replaced the muzzle-loading rifles. And
And now, is that one that you're
that's
holding
one
there?
of my Uncle Wiley's guns. And my
Are those
brother,
in museums or are they in that store?
there's one of these in the museum, and then others that they have produced, are in the hands of gun collectors. My brother was fortunate enough to accumulate one gun and the cannon and the sign from Mr. Brooks. Well, his home was destroyed in that Santa Barbara fire, and all the wood on the guns were destroyed. And
I want you to relax. I see those fingers. Relax. You're not on TV.
I'm not.
No, you're not on TV.
I think I am.
No. Let's. And while you were back there, you got to see the home where you grew up or
Oh
raised.
yeah.
Let's
well,
show
I
those-
remembered that quite
You
well.
remember
But
it, yes.
now I took a picture of it, but it doesn't look anything like it did when we were raised there, because there was a big
Is
porch.
it the brick home?
The brick
over there?
home was our home.
Okay, let's straighten that up where we
And
can focus in on
and then
that.
there was a big roof that came out over from the hardware store, covered over the sidewalk, and that was a brick street in the front. And of course, that was a wooden structure there attached to the brick home. Well, we had many happy hours in that house.
And it wasn't modern, was it?
No, it wasn't.
Okay, is the pump?
The pump was right across the street from our house.
Oh, really?
And everybody had to get their drinking water there. But we all had cisterns that the rainwater off the roof would run into this big
Yes, for
cistern.
bathing and stuff.
And we used that, for bathing
Oh,
and
washing dishes.
washing dishes and clothes and everything. But that was the town pump.
Oh.
And it's still there because Daryl went there
And
this
it's
last
over
summer.
100 years old.
Oh, yes. And Daryl went there this summer. And we didn't have electricity in the town at that time. But, we had gas because we had gas chandeliers and gas lights on the wall.
Well.
And anyway, we had a chance to go in that home when we were up there.
Did you?
And my brother and I went to his 45th alumni.
Oh,
And so,
how precious.
anyway,
it is.
the lady saw us taking pictures, and we walked across the street and told her, well, we weren't being nosy, but we were raised in that home. And she said, would you like to see inside? Well, they had converted it into apartments.
Oh, really?
And so then she showed us, all through her apartment, which used to be our sitting room downstairs. And we had a formal dining room, and we had a formal living room, but that was the sitting room that was her apartment. And then she had a little room off the kitchen, which was her bedroom, and then what used to be our kitchen was her kitchen. But anyway, it was quite interesting.
Well, now your father migrated to the west.
Well, like I said, after the death of my grandfather, my Uncle Wiley and my dad took over the business and worked at it for many years, and Wiley continued on, but my dad had a wandering nature and wanted to come west.
Oh, west.
So he came west and living in many places, and he worked his oil field tools, and he also built beautiful inlaid furniture. And then he especially loved to cook, so he always had a cafe and usually a furniture store in all the towns that he lived in.
Is that where you get that love for cooking?
I don't.
Well, your mother loved to cook. She was a good cook too.
Well,
you don't do much of that cooking anymore?
I don't like to like I used to. The only time we have great big get-togethers is Thanksgiving and Christmas, you know, and I have to cook a bunch.
I can never remember, Louise, when, not, of course now it's different, but when your children were growing up, going to your home without several big pots of food on and anyone that came in, they'd get you a plate and just help yourself.
Yeah, everybody
and
was
it was
welcome.
Fun. Margie Smith and I, we'd come up there and sit around the table and start eating. While you were junior around. But when where did your father settle when he came?
Well, he finally settled at Dillard, and he was there for a good many years. And my mother left her family's farm in Glen, Oklahoma, and came to work for him.
Now
in
that
his
was
cafe.
Glen was in the Springer area, wasn't that what
yes,
you told me?
Yes, it was west of Springer. I'll tell more about that a little later, you know. But my mother's father, Isaac Frazier, in other words, graduated from the University of Missouri, and he taught school, you know, for a while, and soon discovered that he could make more money working for the railroad, so he started his journey west with the Rock Island Railroad. And when he reached this area, he met up with some fellows who were soon to be my great-uncles, and they had come across Red River from Bells County, Texas, with their mother and other brothers and sisters because their father had been killed in the Spanish-American War. And she did have relatives around the Lone Grove area, and she wanted to come to Oklahoma to be closer to them. So they settled at Fleetwood, Indian Territory.
Oh, yes.
On the Chisholm Trail.
Okay. I noticed the pictures that you brought about Fleetwood, and that's in the Terrell. Is that the Terrell,
it was down by,
Oklahoma area?
Down by Terrell,
Let's see those
Oklahoma.
pictures at this time, Darren. And let's focus in on the little building there.
I'm sure you read on those markers.
Yes, yes.
That was the third store. The other two had burned. Well, they had torn one down because the cattle going across the Chisholm Trail was making too much dirt and dust.
And they couldn't carry on business.
Right.
And they said at one time, I was reading there where he said the cattle was so thick coming across Red River up from Texas going to Abilene, Kansas, that the cowboys could walk across Red River on the backs of the cattle, just walking across them. That's how thick they were. And let's move over now. There's a cemetery there, and then there's a marker. Let's go to the marker, Darren, and see that. Yes, it tells
Houston
about
Fleetwood.
Yes, Houston Fleetwood, and that's the Fleetwood community. And it was established in
78.
And it tells a little bit about that. And then right above that is a picture of a cemetery.
That's where the Fleetwood family was buried.
And that was a far-off distance showing how the cattle, it's fenced off and the cattle can't get in there, but this is a closer one. And nothing unusual. I noticed, which I admire, that has a fence around it and has a road, gravel road, where you can go into it, which is I think, very, very nice, because so many cemeteries, landowners sell them or have to sell them, they die off or whatever. And then you can't get into the little cemeteries. You have to fight to get a road into there, but there's state laws. We have a picture. You said your father had a restaurant in Dillard, and your mom left her family.
Well, yes, but let me tell you about the Fleetwood experience first.
Yes, I'm sorry.
Well, like I said, my grandfather met up with these fellows that were soon to be my great-uncles, and that, like I said, they'd come across and settled at Fleetwood. Well, the marauders at that time, which was a band of outlaws, were raiding and robbing the settlers. So in my grandfather's off time, he joined the brothers and some of the settlers trying to help rid their area of those outlaws. And then he had his eye on one of the girls in the family, and so he married her August 14th, 1898. And so on the route of the railroad going north, they had 4 children born, the last one being born at Tyrone, Oklahoma, which was on the Kansas border. And so Grandpa thought, well, his family was growing so fast, he'd better settle down someplace. So he bought acreage just over the Kansas border, and a flood came, and the dam broke, and it flooded all their land. And so the government paid him for his losses. So then he brought his family down to Glen, Oklahoma, which is west of Springer, and bought 100 acres, and they had 5 more children, and they lost one at age 3 with blood poisoning. But he started farming there, and he was a charter member of the Oklahoma Cotton Growers Association. He also took the census for Acres Township, and he was on the school board. All the elections were held in their home, and my grandmother had the central telephone system in her home, great big wooden telephone on the wall with a crank. And when somebody would get a call, for that area, it would go into Springer's main telephone office, and she in turn would call my grandmother and tell her who the call was for. So they had the people that had telephones in that area would have a certain ring, like a long and a short or whatever, and my grandmother would ring them. There is a lot of conversation there that was listened to.
To see, well, what's Miss Jones getting the call about? Let's listen.
Yeah.
And you could barely, the person, if it was getting the call, you could barely hear because there was 8 people on the party line.
Yeah. Oh, yes.
And then when you'd hang up, if you waited a bit, you could hear click,
click, click, click. Yeah. I'm sure everybody listened in. That's about, that was the way they got news,
Well, and that's where your mother grew up.
Yes. Well, farm life didn't offer much for girls, and my mother being the oldest girl, and she only had the one brother older than she was, and then 2 sisters followed my mother, so she and my older uncle had to work very hard, planting and plowing and working in the fields. So when she became of age, she left home and went to work for my dad in his cafe at Dillard.
Had she known, how did she know about a job there? Dillard was a booming city at that time.
Oh, yes. Uh-huh.
So from around Springer, just coming straight, I'm sure they had a trail where Highway 53 or Highway 53,
yeah, it come through the country that way.
So it came through that way. And I'm sure that's how she came. But everyone knew about Dillard.
Right.
The
well, I found a picture of her back at, when before she married my dad, and after she had left the farm.
Precious.
And she was standing on a car that had Sam P. Hale.
Let's see if we can see the bottom of it. Yes.
And she was standing on the running board there. And look at that fancy hat.
Oh, yes, now. And look at her shoes, look.
Yeah.
Did you know what? There's some of them like those today. Yeah. But see that Sam P. Hale in the background.
Mm-hmm. It's on the side of the car.
No one else could tell. What is it, on the running board?
It's on the side of the car.
Yeah.
Okay. She's standing on the running board.
Oh, okay.
But that's what she looked like when she left the family farm and came over to work
hat.
for my dad.
And that long-waisted dress.
Yeah. Well, she was soon followed by 2 other sisters, that were just younger than she was. One of those went to work for my dad, and the other for the telephone company. And so then, after about 2 years of coaching on my dad's part, he talked my mother into marrying him. So they married in April of 1923 at Ringling, Oklahoma. And she was 23 and he was 57. And my other 2 aunts also married older men.
My grandfather, my mother's father, was older, quite a bit older than my grandmother. And then my father was 25 years older than my mother. So it wasn't anything unusual, for that time. And, of course, they saw good, hard-working girls.
Well, girls on the farm back then didn't have much except church and school. And, there
and
just
then marry and have a family. I mean, that was it.
And so I guess they wanted more than that. Well, I have 2 brothers, and George, the oldest one, was born in June of 1925 while they were still at Dillard. And he became very air-minded, and he learned to fly quite young.
Okay.
And
we have a picture of you and your two brothers made later. I think it's, what, a couple of years ago. Maybe 8 or 10 years ago.
Well, that's when my mother passed away.
Oh,
That
was
picture
it?
was made.
Was it?
Mm-hmm, yeah.
And we'll zoom in on that at this time. Very
Yeah,
nice
that's my
looking
two
men.
brothers. George, the oldest one, is there on the, well, as we're facing, it'd be on the left, and the one standing is my younger brother, Harry. They're just 18 months difference in our ages.
Oh, really?
But George became very air-minded, like I said, and he learned to fly quite young. But
now he served in the military, didn't
yeah,
he?
he served 4 years in the Air Force, and he was crew chief on B-29 bombers. But after that, he was a test pilot for Boeing aircraft in Wichita, Kansas. Then he also was a flight inspector, and he flew radiation surveys for the Atomic Energy Commission. But his greatest love was soaring, and he designed and manufactured many sailplanes. That one now is the first Zuni, and then he named most of his his sailplanes for the New Mexico Indians, like the Zuni and the Hopi, the Mescalera, and the Zia.
Now, what's the other picture? The other one.
The
is
other
that
one
the
is
that's
the
in
Zuni 2, and it's in the Smithsonian Institute right now.
Okay.
I don't
Now, he
think.
designed that.
Yeah, if you can make that smaller, you can see how wide the wingspan is. It is really wide, and
Well, yes, your picture of you and your brothers are at the bottom of
Uh-huh.
that. But yes, the wings
but
are.
anyway,
And that's in the Smithsonian.
that's in the
Institute.
Smithsonian Institute. That's called the Zuni 2. But he was inducted into the Soaring Hall of Fame just last year.
Now, is he the one that lost his son?
Yes, he lost him in a hang glider accident.
And that was in New Mexico, wasn't
Yes, in New Mexico. He had, he caught a downdraft, and he was going too fast, and it slammed him to the ground and broke his neck and his back, and he was dead on arrival at the hospital.
I remember that. Was such
He
a
was just
tragedy.
17.
Yes, I remember.
Mhm,
such
that was really a
tragedy.
sad time in our life.
Yes, it was.
Now, my other brother, he was born in Lowell, Ohio, because we had gone back there when my Uncle Wiley passed away, and my dad had inherited the estate. But he graduated from, pardon me, Ardmore High School, because we came back here, after my father passed away. Well, Harry, he always had an ingenious mind, and after serving 6 years in the Navy after his graduation, on board mostly the Bonhomme Richard, and ships from his planes from his ship, bombed in North Korea, and that was during the Korean War. But he designed many instruments for the early missile program, and also a lot of instruments for Rockwell International. But I'd like to relate one instrument that he designed got him into a lot of hot water. He was about 11 or 12 and during World War II, and the Air Force had taken over our college campus, which was just a couple blocks across the street from us. And one day, a man from FCC came to our home, and he said, "I want to know what you have here interfering with our planes." So my mother invited him up to the attic where Harry had his little workshop, and so they found the culprit and made him dismantle it.
Really?
And gave him a stern lecture not to be designing any more instruments like that.
Do you mean that?
But that's
He was
true.
brilliant.
Yes. But yeah, he really was. I'll have to admit, not bragging, because
but
he
was.
really had a brilliant mind. But when he was just even younger than that, I know my mother worked at the chair factory upholstering, and she'd come in and work and sit down in the porch swing and rest, a while. And he wired that thing up one day and gave her quite a charge. And he had a little button.
Is that where my grandson and your grandson got it? He was always wiring himself in when he was little.
Right. Remember the little thing you put your foot on that run the drill press?
Yes.
But anyway, he had a little button on his door to his room, and it says, "Press button for musical horn." And so you got quite a buzz when you pressed that button. But nevertheless, my mother eventually went back into the cafe business, and she and
This is after your father
yes,
died.
after my father
Came back
passed
to
away, and we
Ardmore.
had come back to Oklahoma. And so they run the Dixie Cafe in Ardmore on Washington Street, and they were both absolutely avid fans of baseball. And so Ardmore Indians had, you know, that was the baseball team in Ardmore at the time. And I think I have some
Yes, you
pictures
sure
of that.
did. Yes.
And my mother and stepfather fed them, you know, in their cafe. At that time, if you put that on that other picture, you'll see the owner in the middle, the second man from the left there, was Arthur Willingham. He was the owner of the team, and he later sold it to Waco Turner. And one of our Ardmore attorneys was Waterboy when he was quite young, and that was Darrell McGuire.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, that's neat. That's interesting. That's good history for Ardmore that a lot of
Right.
people don't know anything
Yeah.
about.
Mhm.
Well, and so you grew up then around the restaurant work.
Well, yes, my mother always seemed to have had a restaurant, and my dad, you know, and all. But when our children were young, I loved to work with wood. But I was den mother to a great
Well,
bunch
wait
of.
just a minute, though. When you came back to Oklahoma, you were telling me you somehow ended up in Hilton with your aunt, and you
yeah.
worked with your aunt.
Oh, that's true. Yeah.
And tell me about that, because
Oh, yeah.
I want to hear about how you met Mr.
Okay.
Mr.
Okay.
Farrell.
Well, when we came back to Oklahoma, I went to work for Boyle's Motor Lines in Hilton. I made $22.50 a week. And my aunt, who was 3 years older than myself, worked for Continental Supply for Jimmy Harder. And she earned $30 a week, which was very good money
yes.
for women back then. And we had an apartment together, and the best entertainment that we had at that time was movies and skating. And so Bill Ratliff was the law in Hilton at that time, and he always saw to it that the children were off the streets and at home at a decent hour. Well, my favorite thing to do was skate. So we had these portable rinks that would come to different towns, you know, and when it came to Hilton, you know, I always went every night except church nights because I loved to skate. And so my girlfriend and I were skating one night, and I saw this.
I think let's just end it there. How you spent your spare time in those teenage years there when you were working and then skating. And let's pause, because I think you have such an interesting and a lot more history to tell about Wilson and the area that I want to have another segment.
Oh.
This is Your Life, Louise Farrell, already. And so I'm going to thank everyone for joining us today. And please join us again next week, because for the rest of the story, as Paul Harvey would say. Thank you. Hello. Welcome to Oklahoma Moments. Today we're going to continue our second segment with Miss Louise Farrell Allred, and we're going to continue her life history, everything about her. When we get through, you get through seeing this segment of it, putting it together with what you saw last week, well, then you'll know all about Miss Louise Farrell Allred. We're going to tell, we closed the last segment with you skating.
Right.
Okay, we're going to start off with you telling about, there was one special person you met. That was a real
Okay.
good skater, too.
Yeah, right.
So let's go into that.
Well, as I had said before, the skating rink came to our town and the surrounding towns. It was portable, and that was one of the best entertainments we had in Hilton at the time.
Okay, now
And-
who is this? Is that the...
Oh, now that's when we met each other on the skating rink. But I was skating there one night, and I told my girlfriend that I didn't want to go until this big fella I had seen out in the rink skating. Oh, he was good. And I said, let me go around one more time, and if that big fella doesn't ask me to skate, well, we'll leave. And so just as I skated back out on the floor, he swooped me up, and we skated together the rest of the evening. And
Wait,
His name
I
was...
I want you to flip back to that picture in a minute,
And-
Johnny, here.
And his name was J.B. Farrell. Well, he walked us home, and then we skated together for over 35 years, and we never fell one time. But the last time that Cindy, our daughter, was a junior in high school, and J.B. had been blind for quite some time then, and we were skating, and we started to make a turn and go backwards, and we locked wheels, and we plowed up the floor. And we never skated again.
Oh, y'all were the most beautiful, but I want to go back to that picture again. And we're going to switch back there. Let's see, that's how, of course, he was a little bit older when I remember seeing, I was very young.
Right.
I was very young.
Yeah, really, you were.
At that time considered. Anyhow, seeing you skate, and I can just remember that big smile that he had.
Uh-huh.
And you two, y'all made it look so much fun. And I can remember... the skating rink would come to Wilson, and they'd put up the big rink where the new post office is now,
right.
where Super C now is located, and where the new bank is located.
Right.
And where the new bank is located, I think I may have seen you skate somewhere Super C is,
right.
But then where the new bank is located, oh, and I would watch you. Y'all would turn around and around. And it looked as if you were dancing, with the music on the skates.
We did.
And then backwards, and he was so graceful.
Oh, he could
his
do
shoulders
anything.
were so broad, and I can see because you were very, very tiny, as that picture showed.
Then.
Yeah, well, and yeah, we all changed, don't we? And but you were so graceful.
Thank you.
Did you ever get any pictures? Did anyone ever take any pictures
I
of you
don't think
skating?
so. If they did, I've never seen any.
If any of you viewers are out there and you took a picture of Louise and J.B. Farrell when they were skating, I would like to know about it, and I know she or her children would love to know about it because you were so graceful and so beautiful. I could stand for hours, and I know other people would come and watch you skate.
I found out later that he was the best skater in Carter County. Now, I skated with several people, and I think that I can say that the only one I really felt confident with, other than J.B., was Tommy Pickens. He was a good skater. Yeah. He was.
Well, that's all we had to do here was, the medicine shows came to town once in a while, and but that was the movies and the skating rink.
Well, we, as we started having our children and all, we didn't go anywhere that we couldn't take them with us, and we took them always to the skating rink.
Seeing them,
I'd carry one, he'd carry one.
Then as soon as they got big enough,
they
you
started.
Put them on
Yeah, right.
well, let's show the picture of you and JB and your.
That's the family
kids,
when they were all young. Richard and Johnny, Daryl and Cindy.
Yeah. That's a good picture of.
Well,
JB
we didn't have a whole lot of money raising those children because JB, like I said, lost his eyesight early in our marriage, and his ability to work in the oil field became less and less. However, he had night blindness when he was quite young, but he was a very good mechanic, and so he worked in several garages in around the area. Comus Bakers in Hilton, and Her Motor Company in Wilson with Carl Wilson and Lester Cantrell.
Yeah.
And then we later had a service station and a garage and a grocery store out on the Hilton Wilson Y. And I became very adept at changing oil and fixing flats back then because he run the garage and I run the station and store. Well, we later had a Bell Station out where Good Samaritan Hospice is located now.
Really?
We had a Bell Station at one side, and my mother had a cafe in the other side of the building. And so,
now that's where I met your mother.
Yeah, really. She came to Wilson, then.
It was a real big restaurant, nice restaurant.
Right, and she, a lot of the oil field people always ate there. But J.B., like I said, lost his eyesight early in our marriage, and when he started losing his peripheral vision, which was the side vision, is when he, ceased to be able to work in the oil field, and he just had a tunnel vision, and he could do mechanic work because the light just shined right down on his work. But he was a master mason, and he taught many of the men their Masonic works because he was a certified lecturer.
Brilliant memory. He could say it word for the entire book.
Well, he had
could
to
say it word for word.
He had to have it word perfect
Wasn't
to
he
get
the
a
state
certificate.
lecturer? Yes, that's what you said.
Certified lecturer.
Because I know taught Carl all
yeah,
of his
right.
Masonic work.
Yeah, he taught a lot of men their Masonic work. But he had a wonderful memory, and I will always accredit that to the fact that
when you lose one sensory
right.
thing, another one steps in. Takes
Well,
over.
and he knew everybody that had a business. He knew where all the businesses were in town, and also who ran them and everything, and the people that lived here and where they lived and all. He could remember all that because when he lost his eyesight quite young, why, that he retained all that in his mind because other things, you know, he didn't see, you know, to block that out. But
well, you know, when I first came back to Oklahoma, I lived on Southwest 2nd
I remember.
Street.
3 little ones.
Yeah, 3 little ones. And, you know, I had gone over to visit with you, and the kids thought JB could talk to him or see him, and you had to tell them, well, honey, he's blind, he can't see you. So one day they were out playing in the street, and here came JB by in a little white van. And Cindy was short, and she couldn't reach the pedals or anything, but she was standing up for her dad, steering the steering wheel, standing up between his legs, steering the steering wheel, and he was giving it the gas, and they would go that back way over to Lee's store to get some pop and candy or whatever, sandwiches or whatever, you know. And they came running in, Mom, J.B. Farrell's going down the road and he can't see, he's blind. But he did that a lot, come find out you told
Well, he taught all of our 4 children to drive when they were real young, because if he should be out somewhere after dark, and this was before he completely lost all of his daytime vision, but he taught them all to drive real young, and a lot of conversations went on about that time about the kids driving so young. But I know one time Cindy, you know, had become a very good driver. He saw to that, you know. But anyway, she was quite young and couldn't really sit in the seat and drive. But he had sent her down to Steele's Grocery for something, and she went the back way, you know, so she wouldn't be on Main Street. And the pickup that she drove down there, the gears would lock every once in a while. And anyway, here comes the law. She's in the middle of the street there. And Dr. Cockrell come running to the back door. He'd been up in the drugstore, and he said, Lou, come here. He said, is that Cindy driving that pickup? And I said, yes. And he just had a fit. But anyway, her gears locked over there about in front of the Church of Christ, or there at the side. And here come, the law, that was Cliff Lindsay. And he said, Cindy, what's the trouble? She said, oh, she was so scared. And she told him, you know, that the gears had hung. And so he reached in there, you know, and lifted it up. He said, you know, I ought to ask to see your driver's license for that. She was so scared. But he teased her, you know. But, of course, everybody in town knew that J.B. had taught those kids to drive, even though they weren't supposed to be driving, you know.
Yes, and you know, you can understand why. But, well, during that time, with his health being, you know, with his eyesight and all, you went to work for Dr. Ross. Where did Dr. Ross practice? Was it
right there in the back of the drugstore?
That's what I was thinking, because Pfeffer's drugstore had Dr. Harmon, and I forget some other doctor there. But then Ballew's drugstore had Dr. Ross.
Right.
And so you worked for him. And
no, I didn't. Whenever I went to work for Dr. Cockrell in the early 50s, and he had Johnny West, his nurse, call me, and it said he wanted to see me on their lunch hour. And so I went up there. I had no idea what he wanted with me, and I was begging Johnny to tell me, and she said, he'll tell you. So when he you know, invited me into the office, and he said, Louise, he said, how would you like to go to work for me? And I said, really? Oh, I was thrilled to death.
Yes.
I said, but, well, I don't have any experience. The only thing I know how to do is give injections. Dr. Ross had taught me that.
That's why I thought you had worked for him.
And so he said, well, I'd rather you didn't have any experience, then I will teach you what you need to know my way. He wanted me to do things his way. And so we just, you know, I just enjoyed every minute of it.
What did the H? Did you ever find out what the A stood for? His initials were?
Archie.
Archie.
Mhm.
Archie and
Hugh.
Archie
Yeah.
Hugh.
Right. Well, anyway, I worked for him until his death in 1972, and then I went to work for Dr. Kanaga, and I worked for him until his death, and then for Dr. Meeks until I retired at age 65. But now, while I was working for Dr. Kanaga, he entertained the thought of retiring, and so I knew I couldn't retire yet, couldn't afford to. So I went to higher ed and took real estate courses with my daughter-in-law Jean, and we earned our real estate license. And then after JB's death, I had to give up that part of my career because he always answered the phone and took all my calls, you know, for in my listings and sales and stuff, because I was still working part-time at my other job. So then...
But now listen, I'm going to interrupt you because you went over your nursing career too fast. During that day, Dr. Cockrell delivered so many babies. He had walls, and I mean, they were just small pictures, and he had walls covered with babies.
Right.
Now, you went through that too fast. Just name some of the babies that are now grown and have babies, grandbabies of their own that were in that.
Oh, my heavens.
There was the Cantrell twins, Flora and Dora Cantrell.
But now, let me explain this. He always kept a sterile pack, but he had just retired from delivering babies when I went to work for him.
Oh, had he?
Right.
Really?
And so, but he always kept a sterile pack, you know, in the delivery room, and just in case somebody came, you know, in at the last minute and everything. But I know one time there was a little shy boy that came in, a young fella. I won't say a boy, but he looked like a little boy, but he was a teenager, I'm sure. But he came in there and he sat and sat and sat. And, you know, you always signed in when you come in, and, you know, we took them in by turns. Well, he seemed so nervous and all, and directly he finally got up and asked, you know, how long it would be. And I asked what his problem was and everything, you know, and he said, well, his wife was in labor over at Lone Grove. And
he sat there all that time.
And he had sat there all that time.
Oh,
so
dear.
I rushed up there, you know, to tell Dr. Cockrell about it. And he, you know, went over and made the call. But as far as any more clinic deliveries, he never did do any while I worked for him. But
were you working for him when Dr. Woods came to Wilson?
No, Dr. Woods had came, and he had him down in the other part, and Monty's dad had built the clinic on the end of where the office was, right behind the drugstore. And so Dr. Woods went in there, and then, of course, he also brought Dr. Noma and Dr. Rector.
Well, Dr. Rector came after Dr. Woods died. But see, Dr. Woods delivered Sidney Ray in May of 1954, and then he died. He was on the school board, and he'd gone to a school board meeting, and he died, I think, in September or October of 54. And then the rectors came in November or December of 54.
I remember Dr. Cockrell told me that Dr. Woods would run over to Mr. Bonner's service station, which was right next door, and he'd get a Coke, and he'd just drink it right down because he had indigestion so bad. Well, it wasn't indigestion, it was his heart, you know. But we was getting back to J.B.'s grandparents. He was born and raised in Wilson, but his grandparents came here at the turn of the century, and their first home was over there where Betty and Gilbert Davis has their bird sanctuary. And they sold that home to the Carlyles. Remember, Lois was an early day
telephone operator.
Telephone operator, and all you had to do was say, Lois, I'm going to be so-and-so.
Yes. Mother would say, Lois, I'm going to go up to Mama's. If any calls come in, send it.
Right.
Or Lois, now, will Dr. Woods be able to get down here if it's raining, the creek's out, and it's time for... Mother always said Corrine, even though she named me Corrine. It's time for Corrine's baby to be born. Well, Doctor, don't worry, I'll get him through.
Yeah, really. Well, so they sold that home because Long Bell Lumber Company had built a new home for them up north of the old high school.
Really?
And it's occupied right now by their great-great-grandson, Darren Farrell, and his wife and baby.
Isn't that something?
Yeah. And so, anyway, his grandfather, Bascom Haynes, and his wife Dora, he was the first station master here when Jake L. Hammonds had his 35-mile railroad that came through,
Yes.
you know. And he was station master till in the 30s. And I've been told, now whether it's true or not, I'm not really sure, that I've been told that the first station was just on the west side of Wilson.
That's what, yes, that's what I had heard.
Before it was down here, you know, where they built the big one in the
Mm-hmm.
middle of town. But they had 2 children, and John, the boy, had a shoe shop on Main Street for many years.
John Haynes?
Yes, and he was married to the former Lily Horn,
Mm-hmm.
and she later had a laundry, you know, down there too.
And they had a bowling alley. There was a bowling alley
in the building.
In the
See,
buildings, half of it or something.
Well, their shop across the street burned, and they had to move over
Oh, is that
there,
where it
and
was?
that's when Lily put in her laundry.
Mm-hmm.
But they had 6 children, and then their daughter, Jessie, she married J.B. Farrell II, known as Red because he had
Yes,
red hair, and they had the 3 children, Laree and J.B. and Marshall Lee. And
now, was Laree the one that was so gifted with music?
yes,
Oh, yes.
she always, in high school, she always played the French horn, and then, of course, she went to college and got her degree and taught school in California
Well, now,
for many
did she
years.
write music? Wasn't there something?
Well, she, I don't remember really all about her music career, but I just knew she was very talented and very gifted.
Well, it seemed like I was there one time when something came in, and JB was sharing with us. You had read it to him, something that she had written some music.
well, she wrote.
some big award.
She published and wrote very many, you know, a lot of books in
music.
No, no, it was she taught all these people, all these young students. She taught them journalism, and she published a newspaper, and the newspaper was all compiled by the students, and they were all ages, you know, and they wrote the articles for the newspaper, and she published that, and then she also had a book published, you know, to teach gifted children, you know, in
Maybe
school.
that's what it was, because I know it was something that he was very
She
proud
was
of.
very intelligent.
Well, then the other 2 brothers, there was 4 children. I mean, 6, how many, 7?
John had 6,
Oh.
and Jessie had the 3.
Okay.
And
I got you off your train of thought.
yeah, you
there.
got me off my train
I'm
of
sorry.
thought. Well, when our children were young, I had a great bunch of little, I was a den mother to a great bunch of little Cub Scouts.
Mm-hmm.
And one of them happened to be Johnny Carl Crutchfield. He's standing by
yes.
me right up there.
Yes.
And
yes, right there.
yeah,
That's Johnny Carl.
And
I guess
he's
we'll
our,
always call him Johnny Carl.
right. He'll always be Johnny Carl to me, and he's our state senator now. And there's a bunch of them outside the Baptist church. There's Carl Compton when he was younger too.
Carl's been in Scouts ever since Wilson's
Right.
been here, just about, you know.
Well, you know, when my career with the Cub Scouts took over, women just didn't help with the Boy Scouts, and so we was always in the background. So by that time, I was doing nursing, and Dr. Noma would send me. I know she sent me one time down to the Camp Simpson, and Daryl and you know the boys were there for their summer camp out, and she said, "Well, I want you." She had a lady in labor, and so she said, "I'd like for you to go take the bag and you know go check on the kids." But she said, "I have another reason." Said Daryl. See, before they went, Daryl wasn't going to take a tetanus shot, and she said, "Now, Daryl, you can go. But you will have to, if you get injured, you're going to have this shot and maybe some others, you know." And so he said, "Oh, I won't get hurt." So off they went. And he didn't have to take his shot. Well, he's the only one that did get injured. He chopped his hand open with the axe.
Oh, dear.
So Melvin Henson and one of the other fellows that were, you know, overseeing the Scouts there took him into Ada and got that stitched up. So that was one reason she wanted me to go down there and check on those kids. But Daryl, he wanted to come home with me, and then Rocky Smith, he cried because he didn't want to be there by himself.
Oh, Rocky and Daryl were just like this. Remember all the cars they tore up?
Oh, my.
One they slid down on the side.
Well, remember when...
Was that the Edsel?
Yeah. Well, remember when Daryl had the one car and he had the fenders off of it, and the law told him he couldn't drive that car without fenders, so he welded half a barrels on both sides. Oh, they had quite a time growing up. They had lots of fun.
There wasn't any dull moments at all.
Yeah.
But, well, you know, you worked hard, but you always, like I said, you always had kids in and out, and they were eating, and then you seemed like every Saturday night we had a big musical get-together.
Oh, we had the music, didn't we? Every Friday or Saturday night.
Yes.
J.B. loved to play the piano and guitar, and he taught a lot of the boys to play piano.
The house was full. My goodness, there was Ernest Schellenberger, Tommy Pickens, Elsie Kane, the late Elsie Kane, Henry Means, the late Arthur Wilson, Ed Rutledge,
Sanders,
and the late Roy Sanders, Carl Wilson, and Lowell or Bob Sanders. Wow, it was just a number over and over.
Yeah, house full every Friday or Saturday
and the Sullivan
night.
Boys.
Yeah. And anytime anybody wanted to play, they were welcome to come.
And that went on till about midnight every Saturday night. And you was always fixing snacks and coffee. It got to where each one of us would kind of take something there. And the wives would come along and the kids or whatever, and we'd have great fun. It was just real good fellowship. And Fay and Lester Cantwell was that. Did he play guitar?
Lester never played anything.
He didn't play,
no, but she loved to come and sing.
Oh, yeah, I can just see her now gathering around the piano. And J.B. played the guitar, and he also played the piano.
Right.
Yeah.
And he and Carl's they have played some many things together. And Carl, he could make up those words to those songs.
Do you know I have a suitcase full of his songs and poems he's written. I have a big suitcase full of them, and some tapes. I got some of the tapes out the other day.
I have too.
And was going through them and saw the last musical at the Farrells, and I played them, and it was a little bit painful, so I put them up.
Yeah.
But
well, you know, my career in nursing was absolutely the most satisfying and enjoyable of any time. I just will always. I love the patients. I love the learning experience, and I love the doctors I work for. And I'll always have so many wonderful memories from those years.
Yes, yes.
But my greatest accomplishments, I will say, was my 4 children.
Oh, yes.
Richard, the oldest one, graduated in 1964. And after going to Santa Barbara City College for a while, he joined the Navy and was stationed mostly on the USS Dahlgren, a guided missile frigate ship. And after those 6 years, he works for Vandenberg Air Force Base now in computers, and he's looking forward to retirement. And Johnny graduated in 1966, and he joined the Air Force for 4 years and served time in Vietnam. And then he went to work for Eastman Kodak in January of 1971, and he's looking forward to retirement. And Daryl, he worked several places, but he went into business for himself with dump trucks and backhoes, you know, in the oil field. But he suffered some very serious health problems, and he was forced to retire early. Now
he's a miracle to be here.
Yes, he is. And he's married to the former Jean Holloway, and Cindy married Sid Basray.
My son. My eldest.
Right. And they served 7 years in the Army, and 3 of those were in Germany. And they now pastor the Church of Living Waters, the Pentecostal Holiness Church in Hilton.
How many grandchildren do you have?
I have 12 grandchildren and 5 greats. And J.B. passed away in March of 1986, and after a 5-year courtship, I married Monty Allred on Valentine's Day, 1992. My kids all approved and encouraged it.
We have that, and then I want to go back to some of your hobbies there. But we're going to show you a picture of Monty and Louise together, and that is great. I'm so proud of that picture, and he loves to work with, try to work in some of your hobbies too, doesn't he?
No.
Oh, he doesn't?
No.
Oh.
You know, I always loved woodworking.
Yes.
And
yes.
I made many Christmas decorations for the yard.
That's what I was going back to, because we have some pictures of
And
those.
some of them are over 30 years old that we have pictures of here. That's our little granddaughter when she was quite young.
I see her there behind the Noel. Yeah, that's ours together.
Yeah, Noel I made over 30 years ago, but now the last time I made some
there
was...
she is again.
Yeah, and the Merry Christmas is over 30 years old, and my little elves, I had a lot more of those, and I made a big sled and different things, you know, to go with them. And
looks like she's blowing me a kiss.
you're right. Yeah.
Well, she's probably blowing me a kiss too.
Both of us. Yeah. But
Well,
I did the woodwork. I loved it, and I
you were good
also...
at it. Now, JB was amazing because
Yeah.
I was always afraid he's going to cut his hand off.
I always begged
Oh.
him not to use the bandsaw till I got in from
Oh.
work. But he'd rig up these little jigs,
Yes.
and he'd make all these little things with the bandsaw, and never did cut himself. And I can't believe,
And
you
all
know.
these puzzles he made. Weren't
Yeah.
they amazing?
Oh, yes. And Dr. Tran was so amazed. You know, he was his doctor after he got cancer. And he would take him something every time we went into the doctor's office. And Dr. Tran was so amazed he could not believe that he made those blind.
You know,
And-
in my cedar chest, I have
You have the dancing
the little
doll?
dancing dolls,
Mhm.
and I put them in there, and because I wanted to
Yeah.
save them
Yeah.
for our grandchildren.
Yeah, right. I've got some at home for them.
But well, you know, I noticed, you know, I wanted Monty on here with you. I wanted to do it because his family has such history and all.
Yes, they
but
do.
he had had some places removed,
Mhm.
and he didn't get very good news
No.
about them. The malignancy on the place
Nose,
on his nose. So we will be praying that everything works out for the best for that.
Right.
And I told him we would do him later.
Yeah,
And,
right.
Because his was it his father or grandfather that built the Baptist church?
Oh, no, his dad did.
His dad built.
Yeah.
Mr. Allred built the
Right.
Baptist church here,
Mhm.
and so I want that history.
He built many schools, too, and
Yes,
you need
yes,
that history.
Yes. We need the history because the Allred family were true pioneer, Wilson
Right.
pioneers.
Mhm.
So.